Hi, how's it going? It's Michael Redmond here. Now, you may well know me as a stand-up comedian, which I actually was for over 30 years. Or you might know me better as Father Stone from the Channel 4 sitcom Father Ted. And if that happens to be the case and you're still wondering how I am after all these years, well, I'm still fine. So what am I doing here? Well, I've kind of retired from stand-up, but I keep coming up with, the odd idea for a joke or a comedy monologue or a comedy routine and that kind of thing because, to be honest with you, I quickly realised that taking up gardening in retirement wasn't going to satisfy me enough. It wasn't going to do it for me. Jesus, gardening, And anyway, I don't have a garden, which is probably why I was often found standing in other people's gardens over the years. So what's this all about? Well, this is my comedy podcast, which I've called "What Are You Doing in My Garden?" I suppose the best way to describe it is it's a short weekly podcast in which I'll be, throwing in a joke or two or talking about a range of things from, say, drink driving in Ireland in the 1970s, my chance encounter with Joanna Lumley, pole vaulting geriatrics, and lots of other things. But no poetry. Absolutely no bloody poetry. So if you have anything to say or add to what I've been musing on the podcast, it'd be great to hear from you. Or in fact, also if you have any questions about Father Ted, I'd be happy to answer them as well. The email address for the podcast is whatdoyoudoinmygarden@gmail.com. Hi, how's it going? It's Michael Redmond here again, and welcome back to What Are You Doing in My Garden? We're on to episode 12, which is fantastic. Thanks once again to all of you for listening so far, which is great. Hope you're liking it. If you have anything to say about the podcast, let us know. I'll be giving you our Twitter account and our email address at the end of the episode. So, on to the Euros. It's the big match tonight. I don't know whether you've enjoyed the Euros. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they've been okay so far, but I mean, the standard is beginning to improve a little bit, but up to that, it's been fairly shit, I have to say. But it is the big one tonight. A lot of people, as you know, I live in Glasgow, and I've seen a lot of Spanish shirts around the place, and I even saw one guy on social media saying that he invited his family around, and they're going to have paella and Spanish tapas for dinner. So maybe that's pushing it a bit too far. But from my own personal viewpoint, I sort of have mixed views, I have to say, because I still have a lot of friends in England. I started my career in London and have a lot of affection for the place. And I suppose for any of my friends that do like football, and I know some of them do, I can't help wishing them the best of luck. But I'm sort of torn between two sort of worlds, because the other side is, as we all know, is the pundits and some of the commentators, because I know if England win, they're just going to go on and on and on about it for the next 100 years, sort of beyond most of our lifetimes, probably to people that didn't even watch the match. It'll still be going on and on. Because the World Cup was, 1966? That was, 58 years ago, was it? I think it was 58 years ago. And they're still going on about that football coming home and all that sort of nonsense. So I say, from my friends in England, I do hope you win, but for the pundits and commentators, I hope Spain fucking thrash you. Sorry to be a bit, sort of sitting on the fence a bit, but that is the way I feel. Best of luck to my mates, but not to the pundits and commentators. So it's tonight. We're actually, just in case you're wondering, we're putting this podcast out, and we're recording this podcast this afternoon on Sunday, which is before the match. So I don't really know the result, but I'm looking forward to it anyway. I hope apart from anything else, I hope it's a good match, and may the best side win. That's about as generous as I can be. Further to the Ally McCoist competition, which I've put out a competition for you to guess the number of times Ally McCoist would say "I go see" on his commentary throughout the entire tournament. And so far we're up to 29, which is a little lower than I thought it would be. I thought it would be a lot more than that. He seems to sort of cut down on his "I go say" for this competition. I don't know why. Maybe because it's the Euros, he's changed his patter or something. But it's 29 at the moment, so a lot of you are still in the fray for it. And as you know, the winner gets a free and signed copy of my book, "I'm an Older Brother of Jesus." And if you don't happen to win the prize, the book is also still available on Amazon.co.uk. Now, I really enjoyed 2 weeks ago, talking to my son Jamie about the Euros and biscuits in particular, really, because, as you know, there's a division in the family when he called my Figaro's Old Man biscuits. So I had to question him on that a bit. It was a bit over the top as far as I'm concerned. Maybe they are old man's biscuits, but I remember having them when I was young. But there's still a lot of discussion about biscuits since that episode went out, and got a huge reaction on Twitter because a lot of you are obviously biscuit aficionados, if you can say that word. Is there such a word as biscuit aficionados? I think there is. But there's a lot of talk on Twitter about it. Some of you have favourite biscuits, some of you have biscuits you hate, some of you liked fig rolls, some of you didn't like fig rolls, some of you liked Garibaldi, and so on and so on. But I noticed another tweet from some guy, and it was a biscuit I hadn't mentioned in it, but I do remember from my childhood, and they're called lemon puffs, Puffs. They're kind of sort of a wafery biscuit with sort of a creamy filling, a bit like custard creams, except it's not custard cream, it's a sort of a lemon cream, but the biscuit is more wafery. And he said on Twitter that, whatever happened to lemon puffs, and I don't know. I haven't seen them around for ages, but I used to love them when I was a kid, so I wonder if they are still around. If any of you know anything about them, if they are still around, do let us know, and let us know what your opinion about lemon puffs are. It'd be good to carry on the discussion about biscuits. I might even have Jamie on again if you mention lemon puffs, and see what he thinks. If I can get a packet of them and he can sample them, I will see what he thinks about them. So that could be an ongoing theme for the next few weeks. We'll see how it goes. Oh, just before I finish this little bit, just a quick update on my family butcher, well, not family butcher, my local butcher, Eamon. If you've listened to other episodes, you will know that Eamon, he works in my local supermarket, and he's, I suppose the way I've described him is he's pathically anti-vegan, anti-vegetarian. But he's become even more incensed about the whole thing when I discovered last week that a few weeks ago, that his wife had agreed to become a vegan, and he just can't believe it. But I happened to be down at the supermarket a couple of days ago, and I needed some meat, and I went up to the counter, but Eamon wasn't there, it was some other guy. And in a way I was quite pleased, because I knew I wouldn't have to have an ongoing, well, not an ongoing discussion, but I have to listen to his ranting about vegans and vegetarians again. But I happened to ask the other guy, whose name happened to be Tom, which is completely irrelevant to the conversation. But I asked him where Eamon was, and he said Eamon is apparently attending an anger management course somewhere. And I just hope that there are no vegans or vegetarians on the course, because it'll probably end up very badly for them and indeed Eamon. So in episode 11, I talked about the year 1985, sort of, what news items were on, and the popular music of the time was partly inspired by the TV program Rock and Roll Years. I also discussed, obviously, events that impinged on my personal life. Well, not too personal, obviously, but not they were newsworthy at the time. But I think it'd be sort of good to carry on the theme of that and talk about events that happened in 1986, because 1986 was a particularly momentous year for me, because that was the year I decided to leave Dublin and go to London and try my luck on the London comedy circuit. Now, I'd just like to paint a little picture of what Dublin was like in 1986. A totally different city to what it is now. It's become a lot more cosmopolitan and colourful. From what I remember, it was sort of more black and white, and the buildings were dark, people wore black and brown clothes, and it wasn't very colourful. And it was a totally different city. It wasn't at all cosmopolitan, because from what I can recall, there was a few Chinese people living there, and I don't mean in a racist way, but they used to basically run the local Chinese takeaways in different areas. But that is what they did. It's not racist. They did come to open up their Chinese takeaways. And I think there may have been one or two Indian restaurants, but I don't even remember any in the area I lived in. So it's probably a few Asians, but there was one thing I want to mention in particular, is that there was only, as far as I'm aware, only one black person living in Ireland or Dublin at that time. And he was a student at the College of Surgeons in Dublin, and I'll have a little story about him later. I'll talk about him later. But when I went to London in 1986, it was a bit of an eye-opener. I mean, I had been out of Ireland. I mean, I hadn't been spending my 36 years in Ireland, but I didn't travel much, because if you listen to a previous episode, you'll know that the reason I didn't travel much was because I was terrified of flying. Still am a little bit, but not as much as I used to. But so I hadn't been out of Ireland very much. I mean, I'd been abroad once or twice, and I had been to London before, I admit, but I'd never really sort of, sampled its culture. I hadn't been there long enough to sample what London was really like. I'd maybe stayed overnight once or twice, and maybe a day or two there, but you don't really soak up the culture of a place by just staying for a day or two. But when I started living in London, it was a real, people say culture shock, but I wouldn't call it a culture shock. I'd say more of an eye-opener. I lived in an area called Turnpike Lane, which adjoined a a huge long street. I think it was about 2 or 3 miles long, called Green Lanes. It went from, if you live in London, it went from Wood Green to all the way to Manor House. It was a huge long street. But along the street there was sort of, I won't say hundreds, but there was lots and lots of different sort of vegetable shops, African shops, Middle Eastern vegetable shops, and different types of restaurants. Now, I hadn't really sampled much food outside of Irish food, really, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe spaghetti, but that was about it. But on the street in Green Lanes, there was all these different vegetable shops, exotic shops, but there's also lots of restaurants, particularly Turkish and Lebanese restaurants. And I remember sort of, because I do like food, I won't use that word that people use if they like food because it's a bit wanky, but let's say I did relish food a lot. And I remember often walking along Green Lanes and sort of stopping outside one of these Turkish or Lebanese restaurants and looking at the menu and really wondering what it was like, because I couldn't afford to go in because I was still, collecting the dough. I wasn't really working as a comedian. Well, I was working as a comedian. I wasn't really getting paid very much then, so I couldn't have afforded to go inside. But I still remember looking outside, seeing the menu on the window and thinking, I wonder what baba ganoushas or tabbouleh or koftas and I'd never even tasted halloumi, as far as I'm aware, even before I went to London. So I'd be sort of standing outside the window of these restaurants, staring inside, a bit like a sort of a kid, looking outside, or standing outside one of those traditional sweet shops and, longingly looking at all the sweets and wishing you could buy them all. That's basically how I felt. But in time I did sample baba ganoush and tabbouleh and koftas and falafels and so on. They're all grand, but got there eventually. But I did mention that, the sort of different culture between Dublin and London then, and the fact that there was only one, as far as I'm aware, one black man living in Ireland then. And I'll tell you a little story about him, because I do actually, believe it or not, I still actually remember his name. His name was Samuel Margai. Now, I say I remembered his name, but I didn't actually know him. I'd never met the man in my life before. But the reason he was exotic, because he was the only black person that I was aware of that was living in Dublin. I think he was, because I'll tell you a little story. I opened the sports page of the newspaper one day, and Ireland had been playing an international match. I can't remember against who, but they're playing an international match in Lansdowne Road, which is now the Aviva Stadium. It's the same area, but different stadium. Obviously a lot more modern, and it's pretty cool now. Lansdowne Road was pretty basic. But anyway, that's not relevant. Ireland were playing a rugby match, and in the sports page of this newspaper, there was a photograph in the sports page of the spectators at the match. Samuel Margai happened to be amongst the spectators, but in the newspaper they'd actually circled his head in the photograph, and the caption was, Samuel Margai, student at the College of Surgeons, spotted at a rugby match in Dublin recently. Like he was sort of some exotic word. I couldn't believe the word spotted at a rugby match. That's how sort of unique and special he was in Dublin then. I think maybe even, David Attenborough could have done a documentary about him, how the sort of black man was spotted amongst the crowd in the spectators at a rugby match. But he was quite unique. But it was a totally different culture to what it is now. It's become a lot more cosmopolitan, which I think is for the best. But it was more like a town really than a city then, I suppose. But 1986 there was a couple of sort of newsworthy items that occurred in the year 1986. The first one was that it was when two Irish guys, sorry, they weren't hostages when initially, two Irish guys were taken hostages by Islamic militants. They weren't taken at the same time, they were both separately taken. One was called John McCarthy, who became quite famous later, and the other guy was called Brian Keenan from Belfast. Now, they were taken by these Islamic militants. I can't remember, probably Hezbollah, it was the Lebanon anyway. But when they were kidnapped, they were put into the boot of a car and transported in the boot of a car to wherever they were kept captive. But they weren't kept in the same place all the time. They were actually they're hostages for about 4 years. But they were moved around a lot in case I presume the kidnappers were afraid that they might be found out where they were keeping them. But each time they were moved around, they were transported in the boot of a car. It was sort of fairly well documented. But a few years after they were released, as I say, they were captive for about 4 years. But I know both John McCarthy and Brian Keenan did sort of talking tours around Britain and Ireland and America, I think, talking about their experiences of being kidnapped. But Brian, I'm going to talk about Brian Keenan in particular because he'd been doing a talking tour around England, I think it was, and he'd flown back to his native Belfast, and when he got to the airport, he hailed a taxi and got in and sat in the back seat. And before he'd even time to settle, the taxi driver turned to him and said, "Brian, would you not be more comfortable in the boot?" I don't know whether that was a true story or not, but even if it wasn't true, I think it was bloody funny. But I suspect it was actually true. Now, the other main news item of that year was the space shuttle called the Commander, and it was pretty tragic. It was a spacecraft which took off from NASA, but it exploded, I think, within a couple of minutes of taking off, and all the 7 crew were killed, which is pretty tragic, and I'm not going to do a piece about that. But when I was reminded of that, when I was watching the Rock and Roll Years, and I was reminded of the Commander space shuttle, it brought me to mind of, you often hear recently that these scientists in NASA or whoever talking about the possibility that there is another planet in a different galaxy than ours that might have the same atmosphere of Earth and also might be able to maintain intelligent life. Now, I'm not very scientifically minded. I don't know how sort of many light years this is supposed to be away. I don't even know what a light year is, to be honest with you, but it's a bloody long way away anyway. But I was thinking that, the way technology is going, if maybe sort of in, 200, 300 years' time, they will be able to develop a spacecraft that will be able to land on this distant planet in a different galaxy, millions of light years away. And I don't know in our amount of years how it would be. Let's say 3 years. I don't know. No, you can contradict me if you want. But let's say it takes them 3 years to get to this planet in a different galaxy, and they're all obviously very excited because this planet could be able to maintain intelligent life. They'd be able to meet other beings and maybe try and communicate with them some way. But I think that maybe it could be possible that they could spend 3 years traveling to this planet, and they land on the planet and drop the ladder. And as the astronauts are climbing down the ladder, all excited, they see one of the natives of the planet already pissing against the bottom of the ladder and also eating a half-eaten hamburger in his hand. And as they look further afield, there's loads of these natives with huge heads and no teeth trying to play football with a giant turnip. And I can imagine their disappointment and probably turn to one another and say, "Oh, for fuck's sake, 3 years to get here. We could have seen the same thing on a weekend in Scunthorpe." Which is possible. It could happen. Who knows? So 1986 was musically. 1986 was the year of U2 and Bono, more to the point, I suppose. I think they'd had a hit in 1985. So, but they really became of age in 1986. Really became popular during that year, and the big hit for them at that time was "I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For." All about Bono's pole vaulting grip, apparently. Who knows? But that was also the year when God first appeared to Bono on a remote mountain in County Wicklow and said to Bono, "Go forth now, Bono, forget about your pole vaulting, go forth and save the world from all this famine and war and disease and all that kind of thing." So he did, wrote all these songs, and he's tried to save the world from war and famine and disease. Fair play to him, good old Bono. He just needs to be a little less understated, he needs to get out a bit more, stop hiding behind things. Good old Bono. Now, I'd like to finish this little piece. I did mention before the cultural difference between Dublin and London back then. As I say, Dublin was more of a town than a city, but it wasn't a village, because I remember when I went to London first, I don't know, maybe it was a few months after I arrived there, I was in this pub one night and there was this bloke standing quite beside me, and he obviously heard my accent because he said, "Excuse me, mate, are you from Dublin?" And I said, "Yes, I am, yeah." He says, "Oh, do you know a bloke called Sean Corcoran then?" I mean, Dublin wasn't a big city, but it wasn't a village. I mean, there were over 1 million people living in Dublin, for Christ's sake. The annoying thing was, I fucking do know Sean Corcoran. Sorry about the Cockney accent, by the way. I told you before, I'm shit at impersonations. I remember actually doing that when I first did it in London. Some of the London comics thought it was hilarious because they said I sounded like Dick Van Dyke out of whatever that musical he was in. I can't remember. But what was it? Mary Poppins, yeah. He also had an appalling London accent. There you go. But it's the best I can do. Okay, this is a relatively new section in which I talk about some of my favourite comedians over the years from the years I was doing stand-up. 2 weeks ago, I talked about the wonderful Geordie comedian Gavin Webster. And this week I'm going to concentrate on the one and only, the brilliant Jerry Sadowitz. It also fits in nicely with the theme of 1986 because I say that was the year I went to London first. But I remember at that time Jerry was the kingpin of the Comedy Store in Leicester Square, and even before I started performing at the Comedy Store, when I was still a bit of a novice, I used to go down to the Comedy Store most weekends and sort of to watch the comedians, and I particularly loved it if Jerry was on the bill because he really blew me away. He's one of my all-time favorite comedians. But I'll tell you that the main reason I like him is that, as you may well know, Jerry he can be very controversial, but what I like about him is that he doesn't just sort of try to be controversial just for the sake of being controversial, like some other comedians, who I won't mention. But the thing is that he can say things which upset people, but the reason I like him is that it is coming from the heart. He's not just trying to shock people. He is genuinely like that because I know him. It is the way he is. And I suppose like all great comedians, I suppose you could describe him, he sort of lives outside the norm. He's actually bewildered and agitated by the world around him. But I say he doesn't just try to be controversial. But I used to go down and watch him in the Comedy Store. And the first time I saw him actually he did this brilliant gag. I thought it was brilliant anyway. It was at the time when Paul McCartney had brought out that song. It was after the Beatles had broken up, obviously. I think it was with Wings, Paul McCartney and Wings. But he brought out a song called Give Ireland Back to the Irish. Now, I'm sure Paul McCartney was very well-meaning and all that, but the problem was that unfortunately, some of the Irish people didn't particularly want Ireland to be brought back to them. They wanted to stay in Britain. But I'm sure he meant well. But anyway, Jerry did this brilliant gag at the time because he came on stage and said, listen, I agree with Paul McCartney that Ireland should be given back to the Irish. Give Ireland back to the Irish. Then take it away again. Then give it back to them. Then take it away again. I just thought it was a brilliant gag because it just turned the whole thing on its head. It was absolutely brilliant. I thought it was one of the best gags I'd ever heard. That's his kind of style, and but he is a brilliant comedian. But he's also noted. Many of you may not be aware that he's also noted for his close-up magic, which is absolutely breathtaking. Because to be perfectly honest, most magicians bore the arse off me. This kind of like, pick a card, it's the Ace of Hearts and all that sort of shite. Didn't really interest me at all, to be honest with you, and I found most magic tricks pretty boring. Not just because you knew it was a trick, but I mean, you could almost see things coming. But with Jerry, it was different. And I tell you, the first time I saw him doing close-up magic was in the Comedy Store in London. And he just did a little party piece of his close-up magic, and I was literally blown away. It was all that kind of thing, like where you're actually sitting there thinking, that's fucking impossible. I just don't know how he did that. He is absolutely, I think he's actually one of the top, maybe if not the top, close-up magicians in Britain, maybe the world, I don't know. He is absolutely fantastic at it. So he's not just a comedian, he's also a brilliant musician and a multi-talented man, if you like. But one of Jerry's famous gags was at the time of Nelson Mandela was still in prison in Robben Island in South Africa at the time, and there was a benefit gig I think it was in the Comedy Store. I don't think I was on the bill. I might have been, but not really relevant anyway. But there was a benefit gig for Nelson Mandela to get funds to help him be released and all that kind of thing. And there was lots of comedians on, all sort of obviously supporting Nelson Mandela to be freed from prison, which is very well-meaning and correct and all that. And they didn't do it. All the material wasn't about Nelson Mandela, but nearly all of them did mention Nelson Mandela in their set and their support for the cause and all that kind of thing. Jerry just came out at the end and said, he just opened his set with, Nelson Mandela, what a cunt. You lend somebody a fiver and never see them again. So that was a fucking brilliant gag. It just twisted the whole evening and it's back, and it was a great gag. And I mean, obviously he doesn't think Nelson Mandela is a cunt, but it was just a brilliant joke. Now, I actually supported Jerry recently. I hadn't seen him for about 30 years, but he was doing a gig in the Glasgow Pavilion and he asked me to support, which I did. And he's still as good as he ever was, as far as I'm concerned. It's controversial, but still as bloody funny, which is the main thing. And he even did bits of his close-up magic, which don't really come off that well when he's on stage. You have to really sort of almost be sitting opposite him to see how amazing it is. So if you ever get a chance to see him he's finished a tour, I think. He finished his last tour in April of this year, but I'm sure he'll be touring around again. So if you ever get the chance, do go see Jerry Sadowitz because you will be blown away. Brilliant comedian. So that's largely it for this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode entitled Serial Killer Sponsorship and My Least Favourite Taxi Driver. Now, the reason we've changed it to 2 weeks, as I already mentioned, is that I have this filming commitment, an exciting filming commitment with Netflix. You might have spotted a photograph I put up on Twitter of me dressed in a guard outfit. So I got fitted for the outfit a few days ago, and I start filming on Thursday for a week, and then it's a few more weeks after that, and so on. So that's why we're only every 2 weeks for the next maybe a couple of months. I don't know, but hopefully see you then. And once again, hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you have any comments or anything to say about the podcast or any of the episodes, do get in touch with us on Twitter at Waydim, that's WAYDIMG, or you can contact us on email at whatayoudoinginmygarden@gmail.com. And just to return to the theme of biscuits and lemon puffs in particular, if any of you know where I could possibly get a hold of lemon puffs, or if any of you want to send me a packet of lemon puffs, that'd be great. And I'll talk about it in 2 weeks' time. Cheers. Bye-bye.